Ecclesiastes chapter 3, and verses 1 through 13. And the preacher wrote, "He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity in their hearts, except that no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end. I know that nothing is better for them than to rejoice and to do good in their lives, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. It is the gift of God." Wonderful verses, wonderful truths expressed there. These verses follow the famous text that declares, "To everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven." Ecclesiastes 3, 1 through 8 reads, "To everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to gain and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace." Then, skipping ahead a bit, it goes to the part that I already read to you. "He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity in their hearts, except that no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end. I know that nothing is better for them than to rejoice and to do good in their lives, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. It is the gift of God. I know that nothing is better for them than to rejoice and to do good in their lives." Love that. Now, this is God's word, and we know that it's true. There are things that we see in Scripture sometimes that we wonder, does this apply to me or not? And what's the real purpose of this? You know, these are the words of Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived. And in 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 12, God said that there was no one wiser before Solomon and no one wiser after him. And so these words are not like those. I wouldn't want you to have the idea that many people have, that they're something like the words of Job's counselors, right? Who were a little off base one way or the other about almost everything they said. Even the things that they said that were truthful, they said in the wrong context. But these are words of Solomon that we can take to heart, just as they're written here. And again, some people think that this book of Ecclesiastes is a cynical book, and that it's written by a man who is not walking with God because of these things, talking about all this I saw was vanity, right? But we have to prayerfully read and dig a little bit deeper, because the book isn't at all like that. Solomon says here it's good to rejoice. It's good to be happy, and so Happy New Year again. We are I think everyone here today, we're Americans, right? And the second paragraph of our Declaration of Independence begins, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Now, these words are great words from a precious document to many of us, certainly not on the level of Scripture, but it's very important. And at the same time, these words give rise in the minds of many people today that we are all entitled to happiness somehow, right? Not that we have the right to pursue it, but that our desired outcome is owed to us and should be guaranteed, that we actually have the guaranteed right to happiness. To some people, I suppose too that my mention of this will seem to be political or social commentary, and maybe it serves as such, but that's not why I mention it. The fact is that most human beings are prone to see what we want to see when we read any given document, right? We're not always as careful as we should be, and we have certain preconceived notions. We see what we want to see, we hear what we want to hear. Really, while some of us do much to discipline our hearts and minds in the Lord, that's basically the human condition. We like things our own way. We want to hear and perceive the circumstances in the way that we want to receive them. And while most of us don't mind working very much, or maybe we enjoy it, and the fact is, though, that we'd like a guaranteed positive outcome to our work, wouldn't we? We'd like that to be guaranteed. And when we see other people, apparently undeserving people, receiving, I'll say, that outcome, we might feel in our hearts, knowing better, we might feel in our hearts just a little bit entitled ourselves, right? And we might feel a little bit offended that someone else gets a certain outcome and we don't. And we might have a bit of a heartburn with the way things are turning out, right? We can have a little bit of a problem with it. And we might have a bit of well, it happens all the time. And maybe intellectually we know better, but things just don't seem fair a lot of times in life, do they? You work and you work and you work, and somebody else gets the promotion. You're always on time. They're miss half their, they've used up their sick time by, the second week of January. And all these different things, we invest in something, we've studied and everything, and it just doesn't turn out the way that it should. And we are disappointed and we're upset. Things don't seem fair in life. But the fact is, and especially in regard to these people I was talking about before who feel entitled, the fact is our Declaration of Independence does not guarantee your happiness. Neither does the Constitution, neither does any of the amendments like the Bill of Rights or anything else, neither does God. God does not guarantee your happiness, not in this life. Not in this life. And ultimately, nothing is completely within our control, right? Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. Success is not guaranteed, and no outcome, in fact, is guaranteed, but God is in complete control. The Lord is still in complete control, and he's working, he tells us, he promises, he's working all things together for good, right? He's working all things together for the accomplishment of his purposes and for the good of those who love him, to those who are the called according to his purpose. And we saw a mixture of happiness and unhappiness last year. I think as we look back, there's been a lot of I am reminded very often of the bad things, I'm afraid. It's been that way for a few years. We've seen a continuation of various plagues. We've seen natural disasters. We've seen financial hardship and even catastrophe. We've seen loss, especially personal loss. And I think we all hope that 2023 is going to be better. I think we all hope for a better new year, even if we don't believe. We know that's that line in the sand that really doesn't mean anything going from December 31st to January 1st. It doesn't really mean, but we're hoping this will be a better year. Now, some people probably won't be having a very happy new year. I saw an old Barna report that reminded me of things that I see every day now, things that I read, things that I hear every day. It reminded me of a lot of people's attitudes. And this one 24-year-old man from Washington State complained. He said, "Look, I'm going to age in a world where crime, disease, poverty, rotten politics, incompetent government, unethical and insincere religion, environmental decay, and lousy public education are the norm." He goes on to say, "I'm not excited about the future because it's not a future worth being excited about." Now, I don't know his particular circumstances, but, while it's an expensive place to live, Washington is a pretty prosperous state. I just wonder how he would feel if he was living out his life in Haiti. How would he feel then? It's strange how human beings relate to their circumstances. Americans and most Europeans, and especially Western Europeans, but these two groups in general, we should have a pretty happy New Year by practical standards, the standards of human beings. How many people in the United States own cars? How many people own expensive cell phones? How many people have more than enough to eat and comfortable places to live? How many have access to health care? How many own their own homes and cars and giant TVs and boats and even airplanes? You can drive around most major cities and even a lot of middle-sized and smaller cities, and they've got their local air park where it's not just the airlines that run things. There are charter services, but private people have got their planes there, or they're on the lake. They got they got whole residential communities that are based around having your plane at a dock on the lake. How many of us have so many clothes and shoes that they barely fit in the closets? And and I did say closets. You think about how most people probably live in the world, and if they have a closet, I mean, that's, there's one for everybody, if they have one. Mary and I were just talking with a friend, an old friend from out of state the other night. She lives in one of those less prosperous places in Tennessee, but just a very short distance from her, there are lots of absolutely palatial homes, gigantic homes. And we mentioned to her that, the Front Range is just littered with these homes. And maybe some of you live there and you don't notice, but you don't think of them as palatial like I do. But, one end of the Front Range to the other, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of homes that range from, say, $750,000 to $10 million or $15 or $20 million, even $30 million in some places. We have more here in the United States than almost every way than most people in the world. We have more freedom, and we complain about our rights, and I complain about my rights that are in danger. But today, which is the only thing that you're given, you got more rights than almost anybody else in the world. And we can buy fruit and organic vegetables we can buy massive quantities of fair trade coffee and take it back to our comfortable homes and our reliable automobiles while we're talking on the phone. And if we have a wreck, we just pick up the phone and call our insurance agent. And then after that, if we finish visiting him at his office, we go across the street and we go to our doctor's office and have our annual physical, and even if we don't have insurance, if things are bad enough, we can still get to an ER. We're not going to be left dying in the street. We have far more access to medical care even than most people in the entire world. And according to some sources, the average American only works 38.7 hours a week. Now, we got to look at these statistics, and see which people are included in there. But, there are a lot of people that work part-time. There's a lot of people that have different kinds of jobs where things might be counted differently, I suppose. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, though, in August 2021, the average number of hours worked per week was around 34.6. And I suspect, again, that those statistics could be misleading in some ways, but probably accurate in other ways we don't think about. But, I think the Gallup poll conducted a few years back said that adults employed full-time in the U.S. Report working an average of 47 hours per week. But I think we have to agree that that's a whole bunch less than people that are just scratching out a day's survival. Every day they go out and they try to make to grow enough rice, to catch enough animals, or to take care of the one chicken or the one pig or whatever that they have to keep alive. Some of them work in sweatshops for 14, 16 hours a day, and they still only make subsistence wages. We've got far more than anybody else in the world. And this kind of wealth is, it's just not what you find other places. And many of the luxuries and the convenience that are available to us, when we look at ourselves today and we complain about the good old days, I complain, okay, regularly about certain things I remember, but I haven't forgotten the bad. But, in our own nation, this prosperous nation, when my dad was a kid, all of them wore hand-me-downs, and in the summer you didn't wear shoes. And 9 people lived in a small 2-bedroom house with a bathroom and a kitchen and a living room, and theirs was the only house on the whole block that had an indoor bathroom. And even if you had a ration card during the war, didn't mean that when you went to get your flour or your sugar or your coffee, didn't mean there was going to be any there. Didn't mean that they were actually going to have it. There were still, these people in our country were still rich compared to the rest of the world. Still rich. But today, how much more? It's this thing with COVID has upset the supply chain, and it's like devastated so many of us because, I can only get 1 dozen eggs. They don't have prime rib this week. They've only got hamburger and round steak. What's going on here? And I get upset. How long do you think that people stood in line in the Soviet Union to get a carton of eggs or a loaf of bread or something? And I'm not saying that our country's perfect. Not saying that all of our circumstances are perfect or even close to equal, for all of us. I'm saying that comparatively, we got it good. We got it good. And of course, for us, God's given us all things that pertain to life and godliness, and that's even more awesome. So we've got it good, and yet at the same time, whether it's in the church or outside the church, people are not happy. That's the reason I give you this litany of things, because we have so much and we work for so much. We got lists of things that we want to achieve and other things that we want to buy and things that we're going to have by the time we're 40 or 60 or whatever. And even as we check off the list, people are unhappy. And people are not fulfilled. The population of our country as of just a few days ago is about 335,819,210. And according to the latest government statistics in June of this year, an estimated 37.3 million people in our country used some kind of illicit drug in the year leading up to that polling day. Just in the previous year, they used 37.3 million. Now, that doesn't count marijuana, which is now legal in so many places, and it certainly doesn't include alcohol, which is used and abused far, far more. And it doesn't count the millions of people who are receiving psychological care for depression and anxiety and going to psychiatrists and getting a million different drugs there, right? But there's some slightly older data that we could look at here too. These things, it's hard to grasp. It's hard to get my mind around where our country is with so much and so much education. There are so many things that so different areas of prosperity that we could investigate and see where we range. But quick facts on drug addiction. According to the National Survey on Drug Use and Health, 19.7 million American adults aged 12 and older battle substance abuse disorder. I don't know, but I think that's kind of a woke term for drug addict, right? That's, substance abuse disorder. Almost 74% of adults suffering from a substance use disorder in 2017 struggled with an alcohol use disorder. About 38% of adults in 2017 battled an illicit drug use disorder. That same year, 1 out of every 8 adults struggled with both alcohol and drug use disorders simultaneously. In 2017, 8.5 million American adults suffered from both mental health disorder and a substance use disorder or co-occurring disorders. Drug abuse and addiction cost American society more than $740 billion annually in lost workplace productivity, healthcare expenses, and crime-related costs. People in the United States are not happy or fulfilled. We're the most powerful and most prosperous nation in the world, and people are not happy or fulfilled. During the pandemic, shortly after we started streaming our services, I became engaged on social media with people from all over the world, mostly pastors, but not exclusively. And they were from India and from Pakistan and Uganda and Kenya and other places in Africa. They were from Indonesia, Philippines, Bulgaria, other places. And you know, it's hard when you're talking or writing back and forth, maybe messaging with these people. It's hard to explain to them, you know, people who have seen things about our country. And it's hard to explain how it is that we cannot help them with $50 for medical help for their sick child who has one set of clothes and has no shoes and sleeps with the rest of the family and some cousins in one room. How do you explain to that group of people that, or that person that you're really stuck right now because, you know, I got some money, but I got to spend $15,000 on new windows that are more energy efficient, right? Or my car's 5 years old and I really need to trade it in and get a new one. And the fact is that, you know, many of those people in those countries, we're kind of surprised about it sometimes, but they're bitter and angry and covetous and dangerous. A lot of them are. But this is not a, you know, again, it's not an attack on us. It's simply saying that the jobs, the careers, the educations, all the health care doesn't make you feel secure and happy. People are still on antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications. All the wealth and the beautiful homes and the furnishings, they don't get us to where we want to be. They don't fulfill us. And there are people in other countries that coveting the same thing, and they're bitter because they don't have it. And yet in those same countries, there are also people who are actually happier than a whole lot of us. And they are happy and they are content and even joyful because their attitude is not based on their circumstances. Their attitude is not based on their circumstances. Their attitude is based on their relationship with Jesus Christ. And they're joyful in these circumstances. And when they have a little, they happily give it to the sick neighbor, right? They give it to the kids in the street who don't have anything to eat. You know, we've had some tough circumstances over the past few years, and while I hope it gets better, like I said, I know that we're going to have more tough times. They don't, you know, when we write our resolutions, you know, we hope this year is better than last year and stuff. We don't think about the fact that, you know, there's just going to be bad times ahead. Now, there's going to be good times too. And we lose our perspective very quickly, but there's going to be good and bad times. As we live this life under the sun, we're going to experience a host of different circumstances, and many of them things that we have absolutely no control over. And I think that's the ones that are worst for me, is those things that it happens and I can't do anything about it. But ultimately, look, we're believers, and we worship the one true living God, but he is a God that is incomprehensibly wise and powerful, all-knowing. And the fact is that ultimately we have no control whatsoever over any of the circumstances of our lives. God is sovereign over all of them. In fact, we can't even get around the devil on our own, right? We can't even work with each other and things, but they're all under the control of the devil. The Lord. I'm sorry. You know, and we don't really have any control. Our only hope And certainly our happiness can only be found in the one who does have that control, in the Lord. It's not, I hope I get a raise this year, and I hope that these companies merge so we can get this, and I hope the government changes this healthcare thing, and I hope. What we want is for the Lord to accomplish his perfect purposes. That's what we want. The good news is that the one who is in control of all things is a good God. And he loves us, and he's a God who actually tells us that he wants us to rejoice during our time here on earth. It's not like, well, I'm going to refine them. I'm going to make sure that this life is a miserable vale of tears for all of them. Right? That's the only way they can grow. That's not the way God works. He gives us trials. He refines us in different ways. Sometimes he refines us, though, with prosperity, doesn't he? Because none of us are good at managing money. None of us are good at managing other kinds of resources. Usually, we get too protective, right? We get a little more greedy. We get this or that and the other. And sometimes we become obsessive about, now that I've got this, I got to protect it, right? And then some of it's just like, as soon as we get it, it's gone, right? We're just not very good at things. So God can refine us in a lot of different ways. But the thing is, we look at the character and the nature of our God in the scriptures. It's like we see here. He wants us to be happy. Not every day in every way, but we know that he wants us to find joy in tragedy, right? In him. Joy in tragedy in him. He's in control, and he loves us. And the thing is again, that as we see here, we're told clearly that our Lord wants us to enjoy the fruit of our labor. So let's look more closely at Ecclesiastes 3 now. The first 8 verses of this passage are really a poem. Okay? The first 8 verses are really a poem, and this poem speaks very eloquently about the role of time in the life of the believer. The author isn't saying that all of these events have their own opportune time to which we should choose one or another, right? It's not saying that we're choosing, when to experience these various things. What he's teaching actually is that all events, and there's a lot of them listed here, but he's teaching that all events are in the hand of God, who makes everything happen in the time that he judges appropriate. He makes everything happen precisely when he wants it to happen for his purposes. Here are in 14 statements here with opposites kind of paired together, 2 at a time. Solomon is saying that God is in charge. And it's significant when you look at this. Don't blow by it. It's significant, and it's important that he used pairs of opposites and a multiple of 7, and began his list with birth and death, because the number 7 suggests completeness, and the use of polar opposites suggests totality. Okay, the good and the bad. He's talking about the entire scope of our lives here. Okay, not everything is listed, but everything's included in God's superintendence of the world. And God is clearly at work in our individual lives. He's always trying to accomplish his perfect will with us. And all of these events come from the Lord. They are good in their own perfect time. All of them are good in their own perfect time. And we've read through this, and they didn't sound all good, but they are good in their own perfect time. The inference here is really pretty clear. If we cooperate with God's timing, then life will not be meaningless. So many people have all this stuff, and I'll just snort some coke. I'll just get some crystal meth. I'll just drink myself into oblivion. I'll just whatever. All over the place. If we cooperate with the Lord in his timing, accepting things that, this is his timing, this is his purpose, then life is not going to be meaningless. We'll see his hand in things. Everything will be beautiful in its time, as we're told in verse 11. Even the most difficult experiences of our lives, those will be beautiful in their time. God is sovereign, and he has a time and he has a purpose for everything. And this is not fatalistic. You know, we look at this just like we do everything else in the context of the whole of Scripture. This is not fatalistic. It's not like we're robots and we don't have any choices. We still have freedom and we still have responsibility. But as it's been said and as we sing, this is the wise providence of a loving Father, right? Our good Father. This is his loving providence, and he does all things well, and he promises to make everything work together for our good, right? He causes all things to work together for good to those who love him, to those who are called according to his purpose. Life under the sun, as we see elsewhere in the book, is, you know, and under the sun here, they're the same thing. They're just talking about the sphere in which we humans live our lives. And we see in verse 2 that there is a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck what is planted. Birth and death are the boundaries, right? The boundaries of life under the sun. They're not human accidents. They're both divine appointments because God is in control. And these things happened, you know, in 2022, and, you know, and they're going to happen in 2023. Birth and death. We will lose loved ones this year. And there will also be new people born into this world. Things like abortion, birth control, mercy killing, surrogate parenthood, all these things give people nowadays the impression that humans control birth and death, don't they? Modern medicine, people think they can prolong life forever. But Solomon said that's not the case. We might foolishly hasten a death, you know, for example, though, with, you know, perhaps our own, but we can't prevent it when it comes time. Doesn't matter how many machines and how many doctors you got working for you, how many drugs you've got, when it comes our time, we're going, unless God wills otherwise. There is a time to be born and a time to die. And there is a time to plant and a time to pluck up what's planted. Farmers can plow and sow seed, but only God can give the increase. Only God can give the increase. The word translated harvest here translates a word that can either refer to reaping or also pulling up unproductive plants. And any decent farmer knows that we have to do both, and you know that we have to basically work along with nature. If you're a farmer, you're dealing with the elements, right? You're dealing with the earth itself, and you're dealing with the elements. And we know that we, you know, basically we're dealing with nature as it presents itself. There's going to be wet years, and there's going to be dry years. There's going to be, it's kind of like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, right? This soil's too dry. Oh, this soil's too wet. This soil is just right. That happens, and we have to deal with each one each time. And, you know, there's windy years when all the neighbors' other weeds and stuff get blown into the pasture, and you've got weeds in the crop. But if we cooperate with the Lord, that's a good example for a successful life, to cooperate just like the farmer cooperates. If you learn God's principles and you cooperate with them, then you're going to do well. There's a time to kill and a time to heal. In the plan of God, there is a time for executing murderers, and there's a time for going to war against enemies, especially those designated by God. Surely, you know, there's even a time for taking a life in self-defense. But always, we have to seek God. We must seek God to know when to retaliate and to know when to pursue healing in a relationship instead, right? Whether personal or national. When should we meet aggression with resistance? It's not always as cut and dried as it may seem. And when should we just try to walk away and seek cooperation and healing? There's a time for each one. When should a murderer be executed, and when should they be placed in psychiatric care? See, each of these things has their own time. They have their own time. There is a time to break down and a time to build up. There's a time for dismantling walls, right? Tearing buildings down. And there's a time for building them up. Same thing with nations, right? There's a time that nations rise up, that we build them, but there's a time for their fall. There's a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones. Palestine, and some of you have been there, you know this better than me, but I do read books and see videos. Palestine's a rocky land, and farmers have to clear their ground before they can plow and plant. In times of peace, stones, just like in other places, I think of Ireland, I think of New England and stuff, where you see the rock walls around all these. I like watching All Creatures Great and Small in Yorkshire in the Dales. You know, it's like they've got all these rock walls around all their pastures and stuff. Well, they didn't haul them in. They took them out of the field so that they could use the pasture and they could use the field. And in war, in peacetime, in the ancient days, in peacetime, stones were cleared from the fields, allowing for cultivation. And then in war, just like we see in the Bible, it's like every soldier pick up a rock and throw it in the enemy's field and make it unusable. So there's a time for gathering and for casting stones. We have destruction on the one hand and making productive on the other. And someone has said that, you know, if somebody throws rocks on your lawn, don't throw them back. Build something with them. So rocks can be good or they can be bad. God allows these things, and he always has a purpose for us. There's also a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. And this probably is referring to, you know, as I wouldn't see it from looking at it from just reading it, but from looking up the words and the context and all. It probably refers to the embrace of physical love, but not necessarily. And there would, of course, be broader application, because these things we can see that they apply to a number of things here. But the fact is that, you know, that the fact that there are proper times for expressing love and other times for refraining from love do remind us that God has standards for sex in God's economy. And yet this isn't the only application. There's a time to embrace and there's a time to refrain from embracing. There's a time to gain and a time to lose. This is kind of like, right, sometimes you win and sometimes you lose, right? That's basically what it is, whether it's in business or some other venture. You're going to face both. It's just going to happen. It happened last year and the year before and the year before that, and it's going to happen in the future. And there's a time to keep and a time to throw away. There's a period in our lives, you know, when Mary and I have been trying to downsize, and we've been trying to organize. And then we had getting out Christmas decorations, and we had the water heater had to be replaced. So dig out more stuff. Reminds us that we're a little older now. And, you know, there's a time in our lives when we want to accumulate things for our enjoyment and for future use and for memories, right? We spend the time accumulating things, but then later in life, we have to work out ways to dispose of all those things that have been accumulated. There's a time to tear and a time to sow. In times of grief and repentance, and sometimes even just in case of bad news, I suppose to be like grief, it was customary in Israel to rip one's garments, right? When the problem had passed, it was just as well then to sew the garment back together. God does not expect us to grieve in the same way as unbelievers. There is a time to grieve. There's a time to mend. There's a time to mend. We don't grieve as those unbelievers who have no hope. There's a time to tear things. There's a time to start mending. There's a time to keep silence and a time to speak. And most of us learn this the hard way. So this is nothing new. And we probably can look at our life, and we wouldn't really have a hard time write down a list of dates. And throughout your life, it's going to happen every year. Oh, shouldn't have said that. And sometimes I wish I'd have just told them what I thought about that, because they were wrong and that's not right. And now they have the idea that I agree with them and blah, 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 right? There's a time to keep silence, a time to speak. We don't want to be cowardly and we don't want to be foolish. We do want to be heard. We want to be heard clearly. We don't want to be shut out by somebody who's too angry to hear us at a particular time, or maybe they're even drunk. So maybe it's time to keep our mouth silent for a while and speak at a different time. We don't even have to share the gospel necessarily, but again, there are times when we should, and there are times where we have to confront unrighteousness. You don't have to confront everybody's failures, right? Everybody's little stumblings. But there are times where we have to stand up and say, that is wrong. And we're not supposed to be on every unbeliever's case who doesn't know their head from their shoe, right? But we're supposed to confront unrighteousness. We have to be, we have to prayerfully determine how we're supposed to act in each particular instance. God doesn't tell us every detail, right? He gives us minds. He gives us his spirit. And, Proverbs, for example, tells us in one case to do not answer a fool according to his folly. And then in another proverb, it says, answer a fool according to his folly. I'm not going to expound on that today, but, I think most of us probably know that there are times where it's like, there is no sense talking to this person. But there are other times when it's just right and necessary to correct someone, right? So it's a time to keep silence and a time to speak. And we have to determine what those are. There is a time to love and a time to hate. Some people would be astounded, I think, to hear that Christians are allowed to hate. I think some Christians are astounded to hear that they're allowed to hate. In fact, I've heard some people say that it's wrong, and I've talked about this before, and I've had people try to chastise me about it. But some people say that it's wrong to love the sinner but hate the sin. But if you look at Exodus chapter 18, verse 21, you find that they desired men for office who feared God and hated bribes. Psalm 97 verse 10 says, you who love God hate evil. Proverbs 6:16 through 19 says, these 6 things the Lord hates. Yes, 7 are an abomination to him: a proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that are swift in running to evil. Bible's clear. We're supposed to be imitators of God. We're his people. We have his mind, his heart, right? We have his spirit dwelling within us. We should be like him. Revelation 2:6 says, but this you have, that you hate the deeds of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate. So notice that it says that both the readers and God hate the deeds of the Nicolaitans. It doesn't say they hate the people. It doesn't say that. So we hate the sin and not the sinner. Now, maybe there are times where it is appropriate, where we have all the facts and we're confronted with pure evil. And, because there's a time for everything under heaven. Notice that this says both the readers and God, though, in that one passage in Revelation 2:6, just speak to the one issue of hating the sin and loving the sinner. Or just speaks really to the hating the sin. There's a time to love, verse 8, and a time to hate. There's also a time of war and a time of peace. And the second part of verse 8 here, these are couplets kind of, right? They're joined. There's 2 different things here in each verse for a reason. The second part here indicates there is such a thing as a just war. It's not just that they will occur. God is still sovereign, and he is working in situations even like that, even in war. And the fact is that right here in the same verse with love and hate, I think it indicates that perhaps war is one of the things that we would hate. I think it would be right to hate war. But perhaps also our enemies in a just war are people who we might even rightly hate. I don't know. But in the right season, I mean, it's hard to engage in battle unless your heart is hardened against the people that you've been called to fight against. Now, we should not wish them damned, of course, but war is war. It's violent. It's terrible. It's deadly and destructive. In any case, there will be times when we will, like it or not, no matter how much self-control and how much we yield ourselves to the Lord, there will be times when we will love and there will be times when we hate. And we have to seek the Lord's help to help us deal with this hatred in our hearts. But in all these circumstances, even those ugly ones like that, God is working. And there will be both war and peace, and God will be working out his perfect plan. We hope that there's no new conflict this year, but if there is, if Ukraine, spreads out and starts involving more nations and more nations and more nations, you think it's going to surprise God? It's not going to surprise him, and he'll have a purpose in that. Verse 9, what profit has the worker from that in which he labors? We talked about this at the beginning. This is something that, it's a question I think a lot of us, probably all of us, have asked. Why bother? Why did I work so hard? What profit has the worker from that in which he labors? And the answer is, disappointingly, in a fleshly sense, nothing. There's no real net gain in our toil upon this earth. How many things that we build are going to survive us more than a month or a year or whatever? And if they do, who's going to associate us with us? When I worked in tech, they said, don't get too friendly with these suppliers, because there's always ethical challenges, this and that and the other. And you think they're friends, but you're the customer. And as soon as you get hit by a truck, they're just going to ask who your replacement is. Well, that's kind of the way the world deals with most people in general. For all the things that we work for. And we've seen that already. And we said, I'm going to work all the time and I'm doing this and I just don't see fruit from this, that certainly nothing that fulfills me. The fact is that, all of life, plays out, it unfolds around us according to the will and the plan of Almighty God. And, he raises up some, brings down others. And again, if unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. There are people, as I've said many times, people in Vietnam, people in China, other places, they work from dawn till dark, 30, just to get enough. And a lot of them are smart as whips. They don't ever have an opportunity for an education or anything else, right? And sometimes their crops fail and they starve to death. It happens, right? We all know that it happens. There's no reward, there's no fruit from an activity unless God determines to bring fruit to that activity. It's not just cause and effect. All the hard work of a man cannot change the times, cannot change the circumstances. It can't change the control of events that God has reserved to himself. He reserves control over these things. Verse 10 says, I have seen the God-given task with which the sons of men were to be occupied. And 11, he has made everything beautiful in its time. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has put eternity in their hearts, that means us, except that no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end. In view of the struggle and the exertion that we go through day after day, some people, again, so many people toil, and some of us have at certain times in the past, toil I saw this thing on YouTube a couple of years ago. It looked like it was in Indonesia. I don't know. There was a guy with one arm, no legs, and he didn't have the other arm. And he's changing like either tractor tires or something. He's doing it by himself. Like Nick, what's Nick's last name? The guy with no arms and legs. He's moving himself along the ground, and he uses his hand and his body, and he picks up truck tires, and he does this kind of stuff all day long to make a living. We toil on this earth, right? And some people, it's so fruitless, they might wonder, life doesn't seem, it's kind of an odd gift. Life is an odd gift when you look at it like that. But the thing is it's God's gift. It's God's gift, and it's a good gift because we have a good God. And he's perfect in every way. We go to great extremes sometimes trying to explain life's problems and mysteries, and very often we just don't succeed. But still, if we accept life as a gift from the Lord, from his hand in faith, and we thank God for it, then we're going to have a better attitude toward the burdens that come our way. If we grudgingly accept life as a burden, then we miss out on all the gifts that come our way, don't we? We fail to see the blessings time after time. There's an old saying, outlook helps to determine outcome. Our outlook helps to determine the outcome. All of God's creation is beautiful. The point is that God makes everything that way in its time. May not look that way to you in any particular context. The point is that God makes everything beautiful in its time. And the meaning, in verse 11 there isn't everything is beautiful in its own way. That's right? It's not saying that like the song goes. God makes it beautiful in its perfect time. From the divine perspective, there's no ugliness in the events that come into our lives. Because God knows the plan. He's perfect. And he's love in his very nature, right? He's just, he's righteous, he's holy. There's nothing in his plan that is not, there's in his creation that's not beautiful. Eternity is in their hearts here. It says, and that refers to a deep-seated, this is something that's different, of course, than animals. Eternity in our hearts. It refers to a deep-seated, compulsive drive to transcend our mortality by learning the meaning, right, and the destiny of the world. We're not content. Very few individuals can just go on with their life and not, I wonder why those stars are up there. I wonder how far it is away. I wonder how this, how come this fish lives here and this other fish doesn't live there? It's like everything, behind philosophy and biology and physics and everything is like trying to go beyond, where we are. It's been built into us, and we want to know these things about the world and where society is going to go and what happens to the planet and all these things. Since we're made in the image and likeness of God, we have an inborn curiosity about eternal realities. Eternity is like, I remember as a child lying in bed at night and trying to think about infinity, like in space, right? And then in time. And it's like, and it would keep me up as a child for hours. And it's like, well, you must get out there in space somewhere. And after that, there's just a brick wall, or maybe it's concrete. Well, what's behind that? How deep is it, right? We want to know about eternity. We want to know these things. It's in us because we're created in the image and likeness of God, and we're not like the other animals. We want to know what it's all about. We want to know the whys. We want to know the wherefores, and we want to know that our labor and our lives have some significance in that plan. And that's part of the look for all of these things, whether it's the sciences or it's philosophy. We want to know that we have some significance in this, especially since I've been in ministry. And certainly for the last 30 years, I've spoken with people, old people, particularly, nearing the end of their lives, and people who told me that they were sure that God must still have something significant for them to do before they died. I just keep thinking that there's something that God wants me to do. And they're looking back and they just can't find that much meaning. And if you read the rest of Ecclesiastes, that's what he's talking. He's like, I saw this and I saw that, and it was all vanity. And here they are. They're on the threshold of their transition, and they're saying, there must be something that I'm supposed to do. As we get older and we see time running out, we want to know that our work, the way we lived our lives, our community service, we want to know that something that we've done has made a lasting impression on this world. And often it seems that, if we cannot identify some major contribution that we've made, then our life must have been wasted. And people pass into eternity with those things in their hearts and minds. And really, the thing is none of it does make any difference. The things that count are the things that we do unto the Lord, because those go with us, right? But they're not measured by a building or a bronze plaque or a stack of sermons, 15, 20 file cabinets full of sermons and 16 books, or whatever like that. They're the things that we've done specifically unto the Lord and that have been meaningful to him. This search for significance is a deep-seated desire. It's a compulsive desire because we're created in his image and we were made for eternity. We were made for eternity, and so temporal things, the things of this age, no matter what you do, they're not going to fully satisfy you. It will not permanently satisfy you. No matter what you want to buy or think that somebody should give you, whatever, temporal things won't satisfy. We can find peace only when we come to know our eternal Creator, right? When we come to know God through Christ, and even then we only know God in part. Right? What the Bible tells us, we can only know him in part, and all that we see of God's plan is what someone has called the micro moment of our own existence in the grand span of eternity. Each and every one of us, no matter how long we live as human beings, our life isn't even a picosecond in eternity. How can we possibly comprehend the rest of creation? So the scriptures call us to live in faith. We can't understand these things. The Bible tells us to respond and to live in faith during times of trials and pain even. And in the grand scheme of things, God will make everything beautiful. He tells us here, okay? This is his word. He tells us he will make everything beautiful. But we will understand God's purposes. We'll understand his plans only when we enter eternity, when we pass through this life, when we go on to be with Jesus. I know that nothing is better for them than to rejoice and to do good in their lives, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. It is the gift of God. Nothing is better. Like we see back in chapter 2, verse 24, if you go back there in this book, the advice of the preacher there is to basically seize the day in the joy of the Lord. Rejoice. Enjoy. Why are we so glum so often as Christians? People should see our love. People should see our joy, right? They should see all the fruit of the Spirit manifested. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 17 it tells us that God has given us all things, given us richly all things to enjoy. And I've had friends, close friends of mine that I've had not bitter arguments, but arguments with about because they are so ascetic, and as soon as they get $100, they we got to give 50 of that away. You shouldn't have a TV. You shouldn't have this. You shouldn't. Why would you have more than one pair of shoes? Other people don't have any shoes, and there's always something where you cannot enjoy. God wants us to enjoy. He doesn't say that we have to starve ourselves and beat ourselves and things like that. Biblical faith is a call for joy. Joy is a fruit of the Spirit. And we're told again and again to rejoice, even when we live in a wicked world and under terrible stress. We can rejoice because of our good and sovereign God. We can rejoice because of Him. We can rejoice because Jesus has already saved us and He's already gone ahead to prepare a place for us, right? Ultimately, our circumstances are irrelevant. I'm not minimizing things. Like some people are really sick. Some people don't know how they're going to make the next house payment or utility payment or whatever. I'm not minimizing that. But when it comes down to it, it's our relationship with the Lord, and everything is in His hands. And whatever and whenever we are, I talked about like where we live today and where our parents lived and stuff, and time in this country. But wherever and whenever we are, in good times and bad times, that's just where we are as a stage, kind of, right? And God's in charge of the circumstances, and it's not like, and we say, well, I can't do anything now because I'm sick. I can't do anything now because I'm broke. I can't do anything now because people ruined my reputation. I can't do anything now. It's like God gives us each circumstance as a stage to say, here, now glorify me in this circumstance. Not some other circumstance. In the middle of a plague, in the middle of a war, in the middle of the loss of a loved one, in the middle of your own illness. He calls us to glorify Him in these circumstances. We are refined by these things, but our responsibility, and we're challenged by them, no doubt, but our responsibility each time is to glorify Him. I know that nothing is better for them than to rejoice and to do good in their lives, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. It is the gift of God. The Lord doesn't want us to be afraid. He doesn't want us to be anxious, doesn't want us to be disappointed, doesn't want us to be bitter. He doesn't want us to be ascetics, right? It's like, can't do that, can't do that, can't do that, can't have that, can't enjoy that. We don't have to abstain from everything and constantly worry about rules. We should be generous with what we have, and we should be temperate, but we should not ever feel guilty about enjoying the fruits of our labors. God truly wants us to be happy, and He says these are His gifts to us. He wants us to be happy, to do good in our lives. And we do find meaning in life when we cheerfully accept it from His hand. Whatever it is, when we can accept it from His hand as His gift, then we'll find meaning in it. And we, our life every day and every circumstance is in fact a gift. And we realize that more. I think all of us, we've experienced loss, but now in recent times even more and more loss, some of it very close. But God is with us in all these things, working out His perfect plan. Now, last year we encountered a lot of unpleasant things and a lot of wonderful things. Those were the circumstances that God ordained for that time. And we had all these different things that occurred under the sun, right? Everything in its own season. Now we're in a new year and we're confronted with something else entirely. We don't even know what the Lord's got in store for us. But all these different things happen in its own time under the sun, right? We do know that there's a time for every purpose under heaven, because God has told us that. There's a time for every purpose under heaven. We know also that God makes everything beautiful in its time. We know that He's with us and that He is faithful, that He's working all things together for our good. We know that He desires that we would rejoice and eat and drink and enjoy all those fruits of our labor that he has given us. Let's pray, and then we'll sing to the Lord.